Good morning to all our participants in the West Coast. Good afternoon to our participants from the East Coast, and good evening in Israel. And thank you for everyone for joining us to this talk organized by the Canadian Friends of Hebrew University. We hope that everyone in Israel is safe and well at this very tense evening, not only in Jerusalem and its surrounding areas, but also in other parts of the country. As we mark today the 54th anniversary of Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim, it is most appropriate that we talk about the city. We will not avoid touching upon this week's violent events in East Jerusalem that basically expanded in the last hour and a half or so beyond the city limits. However, our intent is to translate the recent data from the Jerusalem 2020 statistical abstract prepared by the Jerusalem Institute into a meaningful and interesting facts and trends about the city of Jerusalem. For that purpose, we invited, and it is my pleasure to introduce Lior Schillat, Director General of the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research. Lior has an ability to look at the numbers, at the data about Jerusalem and translate it into captivating topics about Jerusalem's security, economy, its diverse society, educational system, and much more. Lior Schillat assumed his role as the director of the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research 4.5 years ago, bringing with him over 20 years of experience in public, political, and business affairs. His bio is impressive and long. I just want to mention that he is a graduate of Hebrew University, and in his talk, he will also touch upon the connection between the institute he is managing and the Hebrew University. Our speaker will take questions from the audience toward the end of his presentation. So simply please type your questions in the Q&A box, and hopefully he will be able to address most of them within the hour. Lior, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dina, and hello, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm a proud alum of the Hebrew University. I did my bachelor degree in the university in Judaism and geography. And although I did it while I was working as the advisor to the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, so you can understand I didn't attend that much, but still the times that I did spend in the university are very good memories for me, and I also have very good friends from the university. I'm also allowing myself to see myself as a friend of the Canadian Friend of Hebrew University. Together with Dina, we toured Vancouver and other areas of the west coast of Canada, visiting the wonderful representatives that you have there. So again, I'm very proud to be here. As Dina already mentioned, this is not an easy day here in Jerusalem. Just 2 hours ago, 7 rockets were shot from Gaza towards Jerusalem. I was actually walking here in the street right next to the Prime Minister residence when the security guards of the Prime Minister office were asking me, together with tens or even hundreds of young girls that were coming here to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, towards an underground parking right in front of the Prime Minister house. So I found myself in this underground parking with the official cars of the Prime Minister right behind us, and tens or maybe more than tens, maybe hundreds, I mentioned, of young girls all around me. And to finish this symbolic picture, I had in my hand the flag of Israel that one of those girls left behind, and we were hearing the explosions of the rockets that fell just a bit west to the city. In order to understand what happened today, and in order to understand how come a series of events that started 3 weeks ago came to such an escalation as I just described, I think that it's important to try and understand, or try to get a better understanding of the city of Jerusalem, try to get a better understanding of the basic facts on the city. And for that sake, I would like to share a presentation with you. As Dina mentioned, I would be more than happy to answer your question at the end of my presentation. So, okay, Dina, you will have to mark me that you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it well.
Okay, great. So, since November of 2016, I'm heading an organization called the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research. This is an institute that was established in 1978 by the then mayor of the city of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, together with Abe Herman, who was the then president of the Hebrew University and the Jerusalem Foundation. Those three organizations felt that a city like Jerusalem, with all its political powers, you know, pushing and pulling each one in its own direction, and all the political powers all around the city, needs an independent think tank to provide policymakers, both in the municipality and in the government, the right data on what's happening in the city, and B, translation of this data into analysis and policy recommendation. And that's what we do ever since. Every year on Yom Yerushalayim, on Jerusalem Day, we are issuing the statistical yearbook of Jerusalem. What you can see here is the statistical yearbook of Jerusalem that was issued this morning. We published it at 10 a.m. Israel time today. Actually, I think that this is the first lecture that we're giving in English, which is based on the data that our researcher gathered in the statistical yearbook. So what I'm going to do is I would go with you through 5 facts about Jerusalem that usually people are not very aware of. You know, people know Jerusalem as the symbol. Some people also had the opportunity to visit the city, so they know a bit the streets, the restaurants, etc., etc., etc. But not many people, including not many Jerusalemites, are aware of all the subtleties and all the different data items of what compose Jerusalem, what makes Jerusalem to be what it is, and I'll try to share some of this data with you today. The first thing that you should know when we talk about Jerusalem, that in Israeli terms, we're talking about a big city. Okay, Jerusalem is almost 1 million people, 36,400 at the end of 2019, 952 at the end of 2020. This is 10% of the total population of Israel. Jerusalem is by far Israel's largest city. It's twice the size of Tel Aviv, 3 times the size of Haifa. I think that Jerusalem is, in that sense, or in many other ways, the fact that Jerusalem is the biggest city in the country is definitely something that affects a lot of the things that I'm going to discuss later on with you. It should be said that Jerusalem was not always the biggest city in Israel. When the state of Israel was established in 1948, the biggest city was Tel Aviv. And actually until the mid of the 70s, somewhere around here in the graph in front of you, around 75, Tel Aviv was still Israel's largest city. But from that moment on, as you can see on the graph in front of you, the population of Jerusalem just went up and up and up and up and up. And we'll discuss some of the reasons why Jerusalem is so big compared to Tel Aviv and Haifa, while the population in Haifa and Tel Aviv went down until the 90s, and then in the 90s with a big wave of immigration from Russia, of course it jumped, and in Tel Aviv it continued to go up until today. In Haifa a bit less, and you know, if you want we can also discuss what happened in Haifa, but that's not the main topic of our meeting today. So we said that Jerusalem is big, but we need to understand that it's not just big for itself, but every population within Jerusalem is big. And when I'm talking about population, I'm talking about the most important word that we need to understand when we talk about Jerusalem, and this is diversity, okay? Jerusalem is a city of diversity, or as we call it here in the Jerusalem Institute, this is a city of the 4 tribes of the state of Israel, okay? So here on this pie chart in front of you, you can see on one hand the composition of the population in Israel. 68% are a non-Haredi Jewish population, what we call the general population. Around 11% are Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, and around 21% are Israeli Arabs. In Jerusalem, however, and that you can see on the other pie chart, the division of population is very, very different. The Arabs are 38%. The the Haredi population is 27%. By the way, this is 2017 data. Today, the numbers are slightly higher. And the non-Haredi Jewish population, the general population, is only 35%. Why am I saying only 35%? Because you need to understand, while in the rest of the country, this group is the majority, this group is composed by secular Jews and Dati Leumi, or national religious Jews, which would be the equivalent of modern Orthodox in American, and meaning in North American terms. In Jerusalem, this group is actually a minority, or as you can see, Jerusalem is a composition of minorities. There is no clear majority. While in Israel, it is very clear what is the majority group, here in red. In Jerusalem, that is not the case. In fact, here, what I did in this pie chart is I united the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab group, and that's what you see here, the part of the pie chart which is in kind of orange, and I put the secular and the modern Orthodox in red. So you can see again that in all of Israel, it's very clear that this group is 38%, but 68%. But why did I do that? Meaning, why did I unite the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox? You know, those are two very different groups. The reason for that is because those are two groups that did not grow up on what I like to call the Zionist narrative. Okay, those are groups. Okay, so the red group, okay, the one of 68% here and 35% here, these are people like me that grew up in the elementary and in the education system on a Zionist narrative. Okay, they grew up on our right to live in Israel. They grew up on Zionism. They grew up on all the basic ideas that compose the reasons why the state of Israel exists. The other two groups did not grow up according to the same narrative. It does not mean that there are not parts within those groups that believe in the Zionist narrative, but that was not something that they took with them in their education system. And that's a very clear definition between these two groups and the other group. And again, Jerusalem is actually the only mixed city in Israel in which the group that grew up on the Zionist narrative is a minority. Okay? And that's a very important thing to understand when we talk about Jerusalem, and when we talk about politics in Jerusalem, when we talk about powers, different power struggle within Jerusalem. It's the only mixed city. Of course, Israel has Arab city and has Haredi city, ultra-Orthodox city. But this is the only mixed city for now that has a secular and modern Orthodox minority rather than majority, as it is all over Israel. And I would go back to the slide towards the end of my talk. So let's drill down a bit into the different population group within Jerusalem, and we'll start with the Arab population. As you can see here in the graph, the Arab population in Jerusalem is around 360,000 people, something like 38% of the total population of Jerusalem. Now, as you can see, Tel Aviv and Haifa likes to brag that they are mixed cities, but as you can see, the percentage of Arabs in Tel Aviv or in Haifa is not even close to the percentage of Arabs in the city of Jerusalem. In Tel Aviv, we're talking about less than 4%, less than 1%. In Haifa, we're talking about something like 11%. And so clearly, percentage-wise, the Arab population in Jerusalem is very big. But look also the fact that number-wise, we're talking about very big population. In fact, there are more Arabs in the city of Jerusalem than the total population, Jews and Arabs together, in the city of Haifa. Basically, if we would have taken the Arabs of Jerusalem and we would treat them as a separate city, it would have been the third largest city in Israel, second only to Jewish Jerusalem and to Tel Aviv. Okay, so in fact, Jerusalem is Israel's largest Arab city. Of course, it's not an Arab city, it's a mixed city, but in numbers, this is the largest Arab city. I'll give you another number just for the comparison. Officially, the largest Arab city in Israel is the city of Nazareth. But the city of Nazareth has less than 80,000 people. So basically, you can have 4 times the city of Nazareth within the Arab population of Jerusalem and still have a place, for another small village or something like that. That's how big is the Arab population of Jerusalem compared to the Arab population in other cities around Israel. This graph shows the relations, meaning the ratios between the different population in Jerusalem throughout the years. This is an important graph, and if some of you will have some question later about the current situation in Jerusalem, I think that this graph could be an interesting graph to go back to, but I will try to explain a bit what we're seeing here. So in 1967, when Israel annexed the towns and neighborhoods that are now what we call East Jerusalem, and I'll go back to this term a little bit later, the government of Israel discovered that by this annexation brought inside Jerusalem something like 100,000 Arabs, which compose something like 25% of the total population of the city. And they try to think, what can they do in order to promise that the Jewish majority would stay in the city? So what they did do is that they used the big chunk of land that was annexed to the city that was empty, meaning the area that was not inhabited by the Arabs in East Jerusalem. And on those areas, they build huge neighborhoods, like the neighborhood of Ramot, Neve Yaakov, Almona Natziv, Givat Tzarfatit, Franchil, etc., etc., etc. And they attracted people with all kind of benefits. They attracted people that live in the center of Israel, center being around Tel Aviv, to move to Jerusalem. And they thought that with this policy, they would promise the Jewish majority in Jerusalem. However, what they did not take into consideration was that by building these neighborhoods, they actually created a boom in the construction industry. And since, unfortunately or fortunately, Jews do not build houses, actually the people that came to build these neighborhoods were Palestinians from the city of Hebron. Okay? So the government of Israel actually encouraged two waves of immigration. One wave from the area of Tel Aviv through Jerusalem of Jews, and another wave from the city of Hebron of Palestinians to Jerusalem, sorry. And combined with the fact that the Palestinian birth rate in these years, it was significantly higher than the one of Jews, we came to the fact that the entire city of Jerusalem grew up, of course. The number of Jews grew up, the number of Palestinians grew up, but in total, the ratio between Palestinians and Israelis changed to the level that in 1980, it was 74% Jews, 26% Arabs, and today we're talking about 38% Arabs and 62% Jews. However, I mentioned before that one reason was this wave of immigration from Hebron. The other reason was the high fertility rate among the Arab women in Jerusalem. But as you can see in front of you, there was a big shift on this in the last few years. So in the year 2000, the average number of children per an Arab woman in Jerusalem was 4.3, which is very high. At the same time, the average number of children per Jewish woman in Jerusalem was 3.7. But look what happened. During the last 19 years, the number of children per woman in the Arab society went down more and more and more to the number 3.2 in Jerusalem today, while the number of the Jewish women went up to 4.3. Now, there are different reasons why these numbers went up in the Jewish society and went down in the Arab society. In the Jewish society, what we see is a change in the mixture of Jews within Jerusalem. The number of Haredim, of ultra-Orthodox, went up. The average number for a Haredi woman in Jerusalem is 6.7, which is very, very high in every term. Internationally, it's an extremely high number. So clearly the Haredim took all the Jewish group up. Add to that the fact that also the modern Orthodox and even the seculars in Jerusalem have more children than their equivalent groups in the rest of Israel, and you get this number of 4.3. In the Arab society, however, this change came because of a social change, okay? All over the Middle East, we see a decrease in the number of children per Arab woman, and of course, this did not skip the reality in Jerusalem. We see the average number for an Arab woman in Israel outside of Jerusalem is around 3. In the countries around us, like Jordan or Egypt, it's 3 point something. And in Iran, we're talking about a number of 1.8. By the way, the Canadian number is 1.6. So you understand that still there is a big gap between both Arabs and Jews in Israel and the number in Canada. So we spoke a little bit about the Arab group. Let's have a look at the Jewish group. So the division within the Jewish group is very different in Jerusalem than it is in the rest of Israel. We saw it before with the pie chart. Here, this infographic is showing it again, while in the rest of Israel, the seculars, as I mentioned before, are 66%, and another 24% are modern Orthodox or Dati Leumi, and only 10% are the Haredim. In Jerusalem, the Haredim is actually the biggest group. This is only people above the age of 20, as you can see on your slide, meaning age 20 and older. Among this group, the Haredim are 36%. When we include also children, they're getting to the higher part of the 40s. At the same time, modern Orthodox are a third of the city, and the secular are only a third of the city, compared, as I mentioned, to 2/3 in the rest of Israel, or in all of Israel, including Jerusalem. This map is showing you how does it look on the ground. So the yellow stains that you see, those are the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. The purple are the Haredi neighborhood of Jerusalem, and the pink are the secular neighborhoods of Jerusalem. And that's how it looked in the reality. I'll explain a bit the map. So the green line is actually the seam line or the border between Israel and Transjordan until 1967, what we call the green line. And so obviously this is a green line. The gray line is the municipal border of Jerusalem. So clearly, if you see the area that is locked between the green line and the gray line all over here, that's the area that was annexed to Jerusalem in 1967. And here right in the middle is the old city. And you can see that while the Arab neighborhoods are all around the city, but only in the area that is on the other side of the green line, the Jewish neighborhoods are on both sides, meaning most of the Jewish neighborhoods are in West Jerusalem, but we can see quite a lot of Jewish neighborhoods also on East Jerusalem, on the areas that were annexed after 67. And those are these big neighborhoods that I mentioned before that were built by the government in order to promise that there would be a Jewish majority in the city. The reason that those neighborhoods were built where they were built on Jordanian outposts, meaning the government built on wherever there was a Jordanian outpost before 67, they built a neighborhood as part of a security narrative or security reasoning to make sure that those neighborhoods would not threaten Jerusalem in the future. So we spoke about the fact that Jerusalem is big. We spoke about its diversity. Let's talk a little bit about the age. Okay, one of the main characteristics of the city of Jerusalem is the fact that it has a lot of young population. What does it mean, young population? You can see here the size of the education system in in Jerusalem is more than 290,000 students. Again, I'll remind you, this is bigger than the entire city of Haifa, meaning there are more people that are in the education system in Jerusalem than people that live in the city of Haifa. Of course, the larger education system we have in Jerusalem is the Arab education system. And that makes sense because, as you recall, the Arabs are 38% of the total population of the city. But the ultra-Orthodox, which are less than 30% of the population, are almost, their education system is almost the size of the Arab one. And clearly the general education system is left a bit behind. Education is one of the most fascinating things when we speak about Jerusalem. You need to understand that the municipality of Jerusalem runs officially 3 different education systems, the state education system, the ultra-Orthodox system, and the Arab system. but each one has its own streams and its own different branches. So eventually we're talking about one of the most diverse education system in the world, definitely the most diverse education system in Israel. The amount of different schools from different branches here is fascinating. It's also, this diversity, of course, is also very popular among parents because they have a lot of choices that they can make, but definitely it's a headache for the people that are trying to run this education system. Another way to look at the ages of the, or the fact that the population in Jerusalem is so young, is to look at the median age, or median age meaning the number of children until you reach the half of the population. So, of course, as you can see, and here we divided Jerusalem into the three different populations. You can see, of course, the Haredim, okay? The median age is 19. It means that 50% of the population, of the Haredi population in Jerusalem is below the age of 19, okay? I have a 40-year-old friend, a Haredi friend, and once I asked him something about the trend in the Haredi streets, and he said, listen, you can speak with me, but I'm a very small minority within the Haredi public, okay? Actually, most of the Haredim are below the age of 20. That's an amazing number, okay? And you can see here when we look at the general population that is using a more normal age trend, the median age is 31, okay? So half of the people are above the age of 31 and half below 31, and the Arab population is in the middle with a median age of 22. So we spoke about the fact that Jerusalem is big, and we spoke about the fact that it's diverse. We spoke about the fact that it's young. Let's talk a little bit about economy in Jerusalem. One of the most, I think the most important economic term when we talk about Jerusalem is participation rate in the labor force. Participation rate in the labor force means the number of people that wake up in the morning and they go to work, okay? Either because they have a workplace or because they're seeking to find a workplace and they're currently unemployed. Now, until COVID-19 hit us a year and 2 months ago, basically unemployment in Jerusalem was not an issue, okay? We're talking about numbers of less than 3% of unemployment in Jerusalem. So when we talked about participation rate in the labor force, we basically spoke about people that have jobless. Today, of course, it's not the case, and if you'll be interested, I'll be more than happy to discuss it further in the Q&A part. But the data that you see here is, of course, pre-COVID-19. This is the data from the end of 2019. So the first thing that jumped to your eye is that the biggest group, meaning the group with the highest participation rate in Jerusalem, are the Jewish women with 81%, and right after them, the Arab men with 78%, while the Jewish men are only 72% in the participation rate. And the reason for that is because of the ultra-Orthodox men. Only 45% of the ultra-Orthodox men are part of the participation rate in the labor force, while the other 55% are what we call yeshiva bucher, meaning they wake up in the morning, they don't go to work, they go to a yeshiva. Okay, and definitely, of course, this number affects severely the participation rate among Jewish men in Jerusalem. The other thing that is very interesting is the extremely low participation rate among Arab women in Jerusalem. So if we're looking from an economic point of view, and you're asking me what's the two main issues on participation rate in Jerusalem, I will tell you, bringing more and more Haredi men and Arab women into the labor force. I'll just give you one number that in order to try and explain the importance of this thing. When we're talking about 23% participation rate among Arab women in Jerusalem, the closest group that we're trying to compare to are Arab women in Israel. And there the number is also very low, it's 39%. One of our researchers, Yamit Naftali, did a calculation. She tried to understand what would happen if we would manage just to close this gap between the participation rate of the Arab women in Jerusalem and the participation rate of the Arab women in the rest of Israel. And what she understood is by closing this gap, we would add $500 million shekel to the economy of Jerusalem every year. These are $500 million shekel that could be added to shopping in the street, to saving, to any kind of economic use, and right now are just not out there. And that's only taken into consideration that every woman that would go into the labor force would earn the average salary of an Arab woman in Jerusalem, which is very low. It's around 1,500 American dollars, 4,800 shekel. If we would manage also to higher the salary of the average salary of an Arab woman in Jerusalem, that of course would bring the numbers to even higher. So these are the two main issues when we talk about participation rate. The other thing that we need to take into consideration is the fact that even among the people that do work, the average salary in Jerusalem is relatively low. That's problematic, of course, but we need to remember that slide, this infographic that you're seeing here, that shows that the average salary amongst the Jerusalemites is lower than the average salary in Israel, and of course much lower than the average salary in Tel Aviv, sorry. That do reflects two things. A, that the salaries of the Arab women and the Arab men in Jerusalem or in Israel in general is relatively low, and since they're a big chunk of the total labor force in Jerusalem, of course it affects the average salary. And the other thing, and that's something that I do not believe that we can change in the long term, in the short term, is the fact that the Jerusalem economy, like most of the capital cities around the world, is based upon civil servant, people that work in the Israeli government, and tourism. And clearly, since both of those labor fields are on the service area, clearly the average salaries there are relatively low compared to finance or high tech. We'll speak about high tech in a minute, so you can get the entire picture of the labor force here in Jerusalem. So when we are taking a city with very low participation rate and we add to that the number of children that we have here in Jerusalem, the fact that it's a very young city, what we are getting is a very poor city. This is I got a request to increase my voice, to hire my voice. If you still feel that I need to hire my voice, please let me know. So I was saying, when you combine the fact that Jerusalem is a city with low participation rate, mainly among the Jewish Haredi men and the Arab women, to the fact that there are a lot of children, so the families are relatively big, you're getting a poor city. 40% of the city of Jerusalem, meaning of the people of the city of Jerusalem, live below the Israeli poverty line. And look at this number. This is really a sad number. 78% of the Arabs of Jerusalem live below the Israeli poverty line. Many times I'm getting delegations here in our institute, especially I got it before COVID-19, that were telling me about their interest in the issue of poverty in Israel and how to fight poverty, how to give equal opportunities and help people get out of poverty here in Jerusalem. And I'm always telling them, listen, if you're looking for a national lab, if you're looking for some kind of a test field to contribute to fighting poverty in Israel, Jerusalem is the place. And the reason for that is that 20%, one of every 5 Israelis that live below poverty line is here in the city of Jerusalem. So definitely when we talk about economic issues in Jerusalem, this is definitely one of the main issues. However, it should be said, Jerusalem is Israel's second largest economy. 9% of the employees in the entire state of Israel is here in Jerusalem. Tel Aviv is number 1 with 11%. So you understand that Jerusalem is also a vital economy. And another thing that we need to know is that in the last few years, we see an increase in some of the more interesting fields in the Jerusalem economy. And the best example, and it's just one example, but the best example is what's happening in the high-tech companies. So today, Jerusalem is the second largest center for high-tech, or the second largest hub for high-tech in Jerusalem. You can see the number of companies. You cannot compare it to Tel Aviv, meaning the numbers in Tel Aviv are significantly higher, yet the trend is very, very interesting. And in some of the fields within high-tech, we see an increase of more than 40% in the number of employees in the last few years. 2 out of the 3 largest exits that happened in Israel in the last 10 years were of Jerusalemite companies. The last one was Mobileye, that was acquired by Intel for more than $10 billion a few years ago, and now they're building a campus with 3,000 engineers in Jerusalem. So it's very hard to understand how diverse is this picture. Meaning, on one hand, you hear the number on the Haredi men and the Arab women. On the other hand, you see high tech is flourishing, and you see the economy, especially before COVID-19, is jumping. But clearly, that's Jerusalem. Okay, meaning we need to understand that Jerusalem is diverse, or as I like to conclude my talks always, it's complicated. Okay, so I spoke before about diversity. The second word that I want you to take is complexity. Okay, Jerusalem is both diverse and complicated, and here are just few examples to how complicated it is. I spoke before about East Jerusalem. The term East Jerusalem is actually a term that can be interpreted in 2 ways. One, all the area that you see in this infographic in front of you in light green, all the area that was annexed to Jerusalem in June of 1967, exactly 54 years from today. I'm sorry. The decision was made in the end of June, but the liberation or occupation, each one according to his own political opinion, of the old city of Jerusalem was done today, 54 years ago. So this area included not just the Jordanian Jerusalem that was here where I'm marking, but another 20 towns and villages that were all around Jerusalem. And during the years, as I mentioned twice before, during the years, Israel built few big neighborhoods in this area. So today, this entire area has 581,000 people. 2 to 7 out of them are Jews, and 354,000 are Arabs. However, many people, when they speak about East Jerusalem, do not speak about this area entirely, but they speak only about the Arab parts of Jerusalem, and that's very confusing. So clearly, when I speak about East Jerusalem or East Jerusalemite, I speak about the Arab population of Jerusalem, these 354,000 Arabs that live in East Jerusalem.
Thank you, Lior. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have 2 more slides.
Oh, no, go ahead, please. By all means, go ahead.
So when we talk about complexity of the relations between Jews and Arab, this is a slide that I actually like to show because it shows the change that happened in the last few years. In 1967, when Israel annexed East Jerusalem, Israel gave the people of East Jerusalem the civic status of residents. Okay, it's not accurate, but the American equivalent is green card. I'm sorry that I do not know the Canadian equivalent, but in general, the difference between an Israeli citizen and Israeli residents is: 1, the Israeli residents cannot vote to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament. He can vote only to the municipality. 2, the residents do not have a passport. He has what we call laissez-passer. And 3, residency can be revoked, while citizenship cannot be revoked. Okay, so those are the 3 differences. All the rest is exactly the same. And between 1967 and let's say 2005, the East Jerusalemites stayed with their resident status. Okay, you can see that in the beginning, right after the annexation, there was a group of people, not a very big group, that got Israeli residency, and from that moment on, the number is almost 0. And then around 2005 and more intensely after 2010, you see the big increase in the number of East Jerusalemites that applied and also got the Israeli citizenship. And that's a very interesting trend that we are following here in the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research. In fact, we wrote a book by Dr. Amnon Ramon on that specific case. So I'll leave you with that, and if someone wants to hear more about that, we'll do it in the Q&A part.
Lior, do we know the cause for that increase, for the trend in 2018?
Of course, but let's keep it to the Q&A part.
Will do.
By the way, we should say we don't know the cause, but we have some ideas. I think that I should say a few words about what happened in Jerusalem in the last 3 weeks. What you see here in front of you is a square. I don't know how many of you recognize, but these are the walls of the old city. And actually right here, meaning a bit outside of the pictures in front of you, there is the Damascus Gate. The Damascus Gate is the main gate leading from East Jerusalem to the old city and to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And in fact, this square that you see in front of you is kind of the town square of East Jerusalem. In the beginning of the month of Ramadan, 3 weeks ago, the Israeli police decided to close this area and not allow people to sit there, okay? They had their reason, mainly to keep public order, since there are so many people that are going inside the old city. However, they did not understand that by doing that, they are taking from the Shabab, the youth of East Jerusalem, they were taking one of their main area of gathering. And that, in turn, created a situation of conflict between those youngsters and the Israeli police that led to 2 weeks of clashes, that then led to clashes all around East Jerusalem, mainly in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, that then led to conflicts this Friday on the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that then led to those rockets that landed in Jerusalem just 2.5 hours ago, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk. So from this square in Damascus, next to the Damascus Gate, started this turmoil, and clearly there are many reasons, and I'll be more than happy to give my theory, what were the reasons that led to this turmoil to become so volatile. But however, we should understand that the first thing that lit the fire was this square in Damascus Square. And when we're talking about the complexity of Jerusalem, definitely the fact that putting barricade in a square is leading to shooting rockets is something that should be taken into consideration. So we spoke about size, and we spoke about diversity, and we spoke about age, and we spoke about economy, and we spoke about complexity. And now I'm going back to the pie chart that I showed you before. And the reason that I'm going back to those pie charts, you remember that I colored in orange the population of Jerusalem that is, let's call it, did not grow up on the Zionist narrative. And in red, I colored the population that did grow up on the Zionist narrative. Now, this is Jerusalem in 2017. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to communicate with you, but I'm posing a question. What is this pie chart? This pie chart is actually the prediction of the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics for the population of Israel in the year 2065, not many years from now. We're talking about the fact that by 2065, the situation in Jerusalem today would be very similar to the situation of Israel in 2065. And that's why here in the Jerusalem Institute, we call Jerusalem the national lab. What we're saying is that actually, Ben-Gurion said that Israel will be tested in the Negev, but we're saying that Israel will be tested in Jerusalem. Because if we will know how to manage those sensitivities between the different groups of population in Israel, in Jerusalem today, we would manage to reflect on the future of Israel. And if we would fail in Jerusalem, then definitely we will have very hard life in getting peace between the different tribes of Israel, the different tribes of the different population group of the state of Israel, as more and more people are, as the population groups that are not part of the Zionist narrative are getting bigger and bigger. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing the job that we're doing in Jerusalem Institute, because we know that what we're doing here in Jerusalem will reflect all over Israel. And I think that this thing goes both ways, both for better and for worse. So let's make the most that we can in order to do it for the best and not for the worst. That's it for now. I have one more slide that I would share with you at the end of after the Q&A part.
Thank you, Lior. Thank you very much. It's clear that you put a lot of effort to try and summarize a vast topic that could each be a whole course for a long time. So Aaron is asking, why is the poverty rate of ultra-Orthodox significantly higher in Israel than in Jerusalem? And I want to add to it, I'm not sure that this is what you wrote in the slides, but I wanted to ask, is Jerusalem the poorest city today in Israel?
Okay, so first of all, that's not the case. In fact, meaning it's not the case. It's true that poverty among ultra-Orthodox outside of Jerusalem is slightly higher than within Jerusalem, but in general, in many trends and aspects, we see that the Jerusalemites are not the Haredi Jerusalemites, are not very different than the Haredi all over Israel. It's true that in order to buy a house in Jerusalem, clearly you need to have more means. And that's why maybe the Haredim in Jerusalem are slightly richer than the one in outside of Jerusalem. It's also true that the Haredi population in Jerusalem is older than the Haredi population outside of Jerusalem, which means that they have less children. The children already left the house. You find here more senior population among the Haredim than if you would find in Haredi cities outside of Jerusalem. So that could also be part of this socioeconomic situation. So again, in general, the situation of Haredim in Jerusalem is not very different than Haredim all over Israel, which is not the case for the Arab population, as I mentioned. Dina, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, I was simply wondering, is Jerusalem the poorest city today in Israel?
No. Israel, the Israel Central Statistic Bureau is dividing all the localities in Israel into groups or 10 groups, okay? When number 1 is the poorest and number 10 is the richest, okay? Jerusalem is in number 3, which is of course a problematic place. And amongst the big cities, there is only 2 cities that are poorer than Jerusalem. These are the cities of Bet Shemesh and Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak being a Haredi city and Bet Shemesh being a city with a very large Haredi population. And yet there are many other cities and localities that are poorer than Jerusalem, and they are in this group number 2 and 3. By the way, one of the things that we did in the statistical yearbook this year is that we tried to divide Jerusalem into 3 different cities and trying to understand what would be or what would have been the socioeconomic rate of each one of the city. One would be the Arabs of Jerusalem, one would be the Haredim of Jerusalem, and one would be the general population. So again, as I said, in a rate of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, both the Haredim and the Arabs are in number 1, in group number 1, while the general population is in group number 6. So you understand that clearly the situation among the general population in Jerusalem is significantly better than amongst the Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox.
Mm-hmm. Diane Friedman is asking, what are your top recommendations or your top single recommendation to government today?
On which issue? Because I have, you cannot see because I have this slide behind me, but I have a whole bookshelf of recommendations that we're giving the government on many issues. The Institute is issuing 40 different research every year on a variety of topics from issues of high tech, biotech, tourism, academy, etc., etc. We do deal clearly also with East Jerusalem, which is the most hot topic in this year. And in that, we are involved in almost every aspect of government policy in East Jerusalem. we're working very hard on education, on transportation, on economy. In general, if you would ask me what are the two most strategic issues that the government should invest in Jerusalem, one would be the relations between the different groups that I mentioned so many times during my talk, and the other one would be the economy. We have to boost the economy, especially after COVID-19, but that was right even before COVID-19. If we want quiet in Jerusalem, if we want prosperity in Jerusalem, if we want Jerusalem to be the kind of city that people like you that live in Jewish communities around the world will really be proud of, economy is the main thing to invest in. I hope Diana.
In that context, I want to ask you, what was the impact of COVID-19 on the usage of internet in the city? And is it a correct assumption to assume that there was an increase or higher openness to the concept of internet among the ultra-Orthodox community?
Definitely. It's a very interesting subject to look at what happened here in the last year or so. So as you know, or maybe you don't know, the exposure to internet among the ultra-Orthodox is relatively low. I mean, there are many, there is a campaign by leading rabbis against exposure to internet. There are many houses that do not allow internet with their homes, including people that do use internet in their job place, but they do not allow their children to be exposed to the internet. And all of that, of course, became problematic when the COVID-19 restrictions started and people had to study from home. So some schools chose to transmit all their lessons through their cellular phone. So you would see children, okay, standing with a phone, of course, not an iPhone like the one I have, but just an old-fashioned phone, and listening to the teachers for hours. But in other, let's call them more modern houses, they understood that this is very problematic for the children. Not to mention that in some of the Haredi house, you will find 7 or 8 children, and they did connect to the internet. And we see that the percentage of internet exposure and internet usage within the Haredi society in Jerusalem and all over Israel skyrocket in the last years. Another interesting aspect has to do with East Jerusalem. In East Jerusalem, the problem was not the will of the people to connect to internet, but the level of infrastructure. We have a very big problem of infrastructure all over East Jerusalem, and part of it is the internet infrastructure and the telephone infrastructure. And during COVID, the education system started raising the issue, and they're saying, okay, you expect us to teach through the internet, but the children, the pupils, the students, they do not have good internet connection at home. Also, some of them do not have computer. And then the government and the municipality made a major effort in order, A, to increase the level of infrastructure in East Jerusalem, and B, to provide all those children that do not have internet, at least some kind of a tablet or a computer, so they would have access to their teacher.
Thank you. Lior, Jack is asking, do all or most of the Arab residents who apply for citizenship get it? And Randy is asking, referring back to your slides on more and more East Jerusalemites applying for residency, especially the 2018 one, why do you think this is happening? So I'll repeat, do all those that apply get it? And why was there an increase in 2018?
No. So I'm answering the first question. No, not everyone that are applying is getting it. In fact, when we started working, when we issued the book about this issue in 2017, the situation was that every year there were more than 1,000 people applying, but less than 200 that got the approval or got the Israeli citizenship. There was a big pressure coming both within the government and from civil society organization in order to push the ministry, the relevant ministry, it's the Ministry of Interior here in Israel, to increase the checks and everything, that all the bureaucracy that is needed. Just so you understand, in 2017, when we issued the book about the subject, the time that you needed to wait in order to get just the beginning of the process was 4 years. So because of this pressure and also because of a political will by some ministers in the Israeli government, and also the pressure of the Supreme Court, in 2018, in 2019, the government finally, or the ministry finally decided to invest a lot of resources in this subject, and then we see a jump. However, parallel to the jump that I showed you in the graph, there is also a jump in the number of requests that are denied. Okay, so basically we would say, this is a rough number, but for every one request that is approved, there is one request that is denied, and for all kinds of reasons. In few weeks ago, we got very good news that as part of its policy, the Ministry of Interior decided to allow youth between the age of 18 to 21 that lived in Jerusalem all their life and they are Israeli residents to get the citizenship almost in an almost automatic process. Okay, so while the rest of the people have to go through this long bureaucratic process and eventually, as I said, almost 50% are being denied, the people that are between the age of 18 and 21 could get Israeli citizenship almost automatic. And that happened just a few weeks ago. So we will have to wait to the 2021 and more than that 2022 data in order to understand how many people would apply in this procedure, in this process.
Thank you very much, Lior.
I did not answer the more important question and the more interesting question, also the question, Dina, that you asked me before. Why? Yeah. Why is that happening? So in general, we see many conflicting trends within East Jerusalem, and one of them is of what we call Israelization, okay? There is a certain group within the Arab society in East Jerusalem that not because they became Zionists, yes, nobody there would become a member of the Likud Central Committee. However, because they understood that most of the economic opportunity lies within West Jerusalem, meaning within Israel, rather than the West Bank, they decided to make every effort in order to integrate within the Israeli society, or at least within the economic aspects of the Israeli society. And for some of them, the Israeli citizenship just makes life easier. The main reason, in my opinion, is the passports. Meaning, if you remember, I counted three differences between residency and citizenship. So people that until recently could not afford going abroad because of the reform that was done recently in the Israeli aviation system, can now go abroad in a relatively low price. But when you have the residency and you have the laissez-passer, you don't have the passport, you actually need to you need to issue visa for every country, okay? So if I want to go to Canada, I'm just catching a plane before COVID-19. I'm just catching a plane and I'll be in Canada in, 12 hours. In Vancouver, it will take me ages, but okay. On the other hand, my Palestinian employee, my East Jerusalem employee, if he would want to come to Canada, it would take him a month, maybe 2, maybe 3, until he would get the visa, and only then he would be able to fly to Canada. So clearly, that's one of the main reasons why there is an increase in the number. Also, there are people that want to study abroad, and having an Israeli passport makes their life easier. So for many of those reasons, those people decided to apply for the Israeli citizenship.
Very interesting. Lior Schillat, thank you very much for your time at this late time of the day in Israel. And we all pray for better news and hope that the tense events of the recent hours are behind us, and that we'll resume normalcy and quiet time in all parts of the country. So Darabah, thank you to all our audience from around the continent, the country. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.